The number on the whiteboard said $47 million. That was what Harmon Freight stood to lose if the Volkov Group walked out of that room. Nobody was looking at Lena Briggs. That was the thing about being the woman who refilled the coffee carafes. Nobody ever looked at you. You moved through spaces like furniture moved. Necessary, unnoticed, slid against the wall when real business started. Lena had learned that years ago, back when she was 23, and taking night classes at a community college in Columbus while cleaning offices during the day. She had learned to be invisible so thoroughly that it had become a kind of superpower. People said things in front of her that they would never say in front of another executive. They argued in front of her. They lied in front of her. Today, in the 42nd floor conference room of the Harmon Freight headquarters in Chicago, they were about to make a catastrophic mistake in front of her, and they had no idea. Lena set the fresh carafe down on the credenza at 9:14 in the morning, the same way she had done every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 16 months. The conference room smelled like leather and anxiety. 8 men in suits sat around a table that cost more than her annual salary. At the head of the table was Conrad Harmon himself, 61 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who had his initials monogrammed on his cufflinks. Across from him sat 3 representatives from Volkov International, a Russian logistics conglomerate that had been quietly acquiring American freight companies for the past 4 years. Lena recognized the lead negotiator immediately, Dmitry Volkov. She had seen his photograph in the business section often enough. He was younger than she expected in person, maybe 50, lean, watchful, with the particular stillness of a man who had learned to wait people out. The translator sitting to Conrad's left was a young man named Bradley something or other, brought in from a firm downtown. Bradley was sweating through his collar. The meeting had been going for 2 hours before Lena arrived to swap out the carafes. She could tell from the body language alone that it was going badly. Conrad kept touching the back of his neck. His CFO, a thin man named Arthur Fisk, was scribbling on a legal pad with the frantic energy of someone who has run out of ideas. The 2 junior Volkov representatives were exchanging small, private glances across the table, not hostile glances, amused ones. Lena moved to the corner to collect the used cups. She was good at this, silent, efficient, done in under 4 minutes. But as she reached for the cup nearest the Volkov side of the table, she caught the words coming from one of the junior men, spoken low and fast in Russian, directed at Dmitry. They still don't understand that what we're offering is a penalty clause, not a bonus structure. Their translator doesn't know the difference between Pribil and Periplatat. He's been mistranslating the entire 3rd section. She picked up the cup. She reached for the next one. The second junior man replied quieter, "Should we correct them?" Dmitry's face showed nothing. No. What came next was said in a tone so flat and certain that it settled in Lena's stomach like a stone. "Let them sign. They'll discover it in 60 days. Lena set the cups on her tray. Her face was neutral. Her heart was not. She finished her collection. She moved back to the credenza. She stood there for exactly the length of time it took her to breathe in and breathe out 4 times, looking at the carafe, calculating. The 3rd section of the contract, which she had never seen but could infer, apparently contained language that looked like a revenue-sharing bonus, but was actually a penalty trigger. Bradley, the translator, had been rendering Periplatat as something close to surplus payment when it meant, in this context, overage liability. The difference, in a $47 million deal, was not small. Bradley did not know this. Conrad Harmon did not know this. Nobody in this room who was on Conrad's side knew this, except Lena. She had grown up speaking Russian. Her mother was from Yekaterinburg. Came over in 1991, married a man from Cleveland, raised Lena in a house where Russian was spoken at dinner and English was spoken everywhere else. Lena had studied linguistics at Ohio State before the money ran out in her junior year. She had spent the next decade doing exactly what she was doing now. Quiet work, skilled work, work that nobody with a business degree considered worth noticing. She had also, in those same 10 years, picked up enough financial literacy from the business magazines left in break rooms and the online courses she took on weekends that she understood what $47 million with a buried penalty clause would do to a company like Harmon Freight. It would hollow it out. Within 2 years. She stood at the credenza for 30 seconds. 40. The meeting continued around her. Bradley attempted another translation, stumbled, corrected himself wrong. Here was the problem with being invisible. Nobody expected you to speak. Here was the other problem. She was about to anyway. Lena turned around. "Excuse me." The room didn't quite stop. It slowed, the way a record slows when someone puts a finger on it. Conrad Harmon looked up with the expression of a man who had just heard a chair make a sound. His eyes found Lena, her uniform, her tray, her size, and made a decision about her in about half a second. "Miss, we're in the middle of. Your translator has been mistranslating periplatat as surplus payment," Lena said. "In this context, in a contract with a Volkov subsidiary, it means overage liability. The third section of what you're about to sign is not a bonus structure. It's a penalty clause. The silence that followed was the specific silence of people trying to decide if they had heard correctly. Arthur Fisk stared at her. Bradley, the translator, had gone the color of old chalk. Dmitry Volkov had gone very, very still. Conrad Harmon said, in a voice that had probably never once in his life been patient with someone holding a serving tray, "I'm sorry, who are you?" "My name is Lena Briggs. I've been your facilities service coordinator on this floor for 16 months. My mother is from Yekaterinburg. I studied linguistics." She kept her voice level. "I understand if this is not the introduction you were expecting, but I need you to hear what I just said." One of the junior Volkov men said something in Russian. It was not kind. Lena looked at him directly and replied, in Russian, that she had heard him and that he should perhaps choose his words more carefully given the circumstances. The man's face did something complicated. Dmitry Volkov looked at Lena for the first time. Not through her. At her. Conrad Harmon was watching this exchange with the expression of a man who had wandered into a play he didn't have a script for. He looked at his CFO. Arthur Fisk gave the smallest, most helpless shrug. "What exactly," Conrad said slowly, "does this penalty clause do?" "It triggers on any quarter where Harmon's freight volume falls below 92% of the projected baseline in Exhibit C," Lena said, "which your last 3 quarters have not met. Meaning that as of the first reporting period after signature, Volkov International would be entitled to a payment adjustment that effectively transfers controlling interest in the debt structure of your Northern Corridor operations." She had put it together in the 60 seconds she'd been standing at that credenza. Logistics contracts were not her specialty. Penalty structures embedded in acquisition language were not her specialty. But she had read enough and listened enough and spent enough nights studying enough things that nobody expected her to know that the shape of it had come clear. Arthur Fisk was very slowly opening the document in front of him to the 3rd section. "Page 31, Lena said quietly. "Paragraph 4, the word is used 3 times. The room waited while Arthur Fisk found page 31, paragraph 4. His finger moved across the text. His face changed. He looked at Conrad. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Conrad Harmon looked at the document. He looked at Bradley, who was now staring at his own shoes. He looked at Lena. The moment stretched. Lena was aware, with the kind of cold clarity that comes from having spent a lifetime being underestimated, that this could go one of several ways. Conrad could be embarrassed enough to dismiss her entirely. He could be angry. He could. And this was the version she had not quite let herself hope for, standing at that credenza, deciding whether to speak, actually listen. "Get her a chair," Conrad said. Nobody moved for a second. Then Arthur Fisk pulled out the chair to his left. Lena set the tray down on the credenza. She walked to the table. She sat down. Dmitry Volkov watched her do it, and for just a moment, something crossed his face that was not quite a smile and not quite admiration, and was probably, she thought, a little bit of both. The next 3 hours were unlike any 3 hours Lena Briggs had ever spent. Conrad's team postponed the signature. Bradley, the translator, to his credit, did not fight it. He simply looked relieved to be corrected rather than exposed. A lawyer was called in. The document was reviewed page by page, with Lena reading the Russian alongside the English and flagging every discrepancy. There were 6 of them. 6 places where the translation had drifted. Not always dramatically, but enough that what the document said in English and what it said in Russian were 2 different agreements. Arthur Fisk kept making small sounds of suppressed horror each time Lena pointed to a new one. Dmitry Volkov did not leave. He sat at his end of the table and watched, and very occasionally, he interjected in Russian to clarify something. And the fact that he was clarifying rather than denying told Lena something about him that she filed away. By noon, the mood in the room had shifted entirely. Conrad's team had excused themselves to a smaller conference room twice. The Volkov representatives had made 2 phone calls. The revised document was being reconstructed from scratch, this time with a new translator called in from a certified firm, and with Lena sitting at the table as a second set of ears. She had not been asked to leave. Nobody had suggested she return to the credenza. She was not sure any of them had quite worked out what to do with her, and she understood that too. The cognitive dissonance of someone who moved through your peripheral vision every week, suddenly being the most important person in the room. Around 1 o'clock, Conrad sent out for sandwiches. When they arrived, he put one in front of Lena without asking what she wanted, and it was the tuna on wheat, which was actually exactly what she would have chosen, and she did not know what to do with the small warmth of that. The deal did not close that day. That was not a failure. It was, in fact, the better outcome. Both sides needed to go back and look at what they had nearly agreed to. Dmitry Volkov, leaving, paused in the doorway of the conference room. He looked across the table at Conrad and he said, in English, for the first time all day, you should pay her. Then he looked at Lena. Whatever you are paying her, he said. It is wrong. He left. Conrad looked at Arthur. Arthur looked at Lena. Lena looked at the revised document in front of her and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment had not already said. She thought about the 16 months she had spent on this floor, the times she had passed Conrad Harmon in the hallway and he had not looked at her, the times she had overheard strategy conversations through conference room glass that she could have contributed to had anyone thought to ask. She thought about her mother, who had come to this country at 26 with a suitcase and a degree that didn't transfer, and who had spent 20 years cleaning hospital rooms and who had never once complained about the distance between what she was capable of and what she was asked to do. Lena was not her mother, but she understood the math. The next morning, she arrived at 8 o'clock as usual. She changed into her uniform in the service locker room. She picked up her schedule for the day. Floor 42, coffee service, 9 to 11, same as always. At 8:43, her phone rang. It was Arthur Fisk's assistant asking if she could come up to the executive suite. The executive suite was on 44. Lena had cleaned it on Mondays, but she had never been invited there as anything other than the person with the carafe. She went up. Conrad Harmon was at his desk. Arthur Fisk was on the sofa. There was a third person. Lena didn't recognize in a dark blazer, with the specific watchful composure of someone from human resources or legal. Conrad stood when she came in. He stood. Lena noticed that. Sit down, please, he said, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat. What followed was direct enough that she respected it. Conrad Harmon was not a man who had built a freight company over 30 years by being incapable of learning things. He had looked up Lena's employment file that morning. He had, apparently, been on the phone with 3 people before 8 o'clock, and one of them was someone Lena did not recognize but whose name, when Conrad mentioned it, meant something to Arthur Fisk, because he straightened slightly. Conrad said, I want to offer you a position. Lena said, what position? Director of Contract Compliance. He slid a folder across the desk. It's a new role. We've needed it for a while. I want someone in that seat who will actually read what they're given. The folder contained a salary figure. Lena looked at it. She looked at it for exactly as long as it took her to confirm that it was real, and then she looked up. "I'll need an office with a door," she said. Conrad almost smiled. "Done. And I'll need direct access to any contract with a non-English counterparty before it goes to outside counsel software. Also done." She looked at the folder again. She thought about the contract on the table yesterday, about page 31, paragraph 4, about Bradley sweating through his collar. She thought about the $47 million and what it would have meant for the warehouse workers in the northern corridor, who had no idea how close they had come. "I'll need a week to give notice to the facilities company," she said. "They'll need someone to cover my accounts." Conrad nodded. There was something in his face that was not quite guilt and not quite respect, and was probably, she thought, a combination of both, shaded with the particular discomfort of a man who is realizing something he should have seen much earlier. She stood to leave. At the door she stopped. "The Volkov deal," she said. "If they come back, and I think they will, because the northern corridor is still what they want. The new translator they bring in will need to be vetted by someone who understands both the language and the freight industry. I can do that. But not if I'm pouring coffee." Conrad looked at her steadily. "You won't be pouring coffee, Miss Briggs." It was the first time he had used her last name. She walked out of the office, down the hallway, past the elevator bank, and into the stairwell because she wanted 1 minute alone before she got back into the part of the building where people could see her face. She stood on the landing between 43 and 44, in the echoey quiet of a building stairwell at 9 in the morning, and she pressed her back against the concrete wall. Her hands were not shaking. They had not shaken once, not yesterday, not this morning, not in that office. She had been steady through all of it. That steadiness had cost something, she knew that. The way you know a muscle has been working only after the effort is over. And now, alone on this landing, she let herself feel the full weight of what the last 24 hours had been. 16 months. She had been in that building for 16 months. She thought about all the contracts she had not been in the room for. All the conversations she had overheard through glass and not been able to act on. All the times she had known something that nobody had thought to ask her. A whole architecture of invisible knowledge, built up over years of doing work that people looked through. She took a breath. She pushed off the wall. The Volkov group did come back. 6 weeks later, with a new document and a different translator, and sitting across from them, Lena Briggs, not in a uniform, not with a carafe, but in a seat at the table where she had always, quietly, already belonged. Dmitry Volkov saw her when he walked in. He stopped for just a second in the doorway. Then he crossed the room, extended his hand, and said in Russian, "I thought you might be here." Lena shook his hand. "Then you were paying attention," she said, also in Russian. "I always pay attention," he said. "That is how I knew yesterday that you were the only honest person in the room. The deal that closed was a good deal, a real one this time. Numbers that meant the same thing in both languages, terms that held up in the light. The northern corridor stayed intact. The warehouse workers in Gary and in Rockford and in the 4 depots along the Michigan border did not lose their jobs. Most of them never knew how close it had gotten. Lena knew. That was, she had come to understand, the particular condition of being the person who sees clearly from the place where no one thinks to look. You carry the knowledge of what almost happened. You carry the before and after. You know the exact weight of the distance between the two. On the day the revised contract signed, Conrad Harmon walked out of the conference room beside her. Then he said, without looking at her, the way people say things they mean too much to dress up, "I don't know how we didn't see you." Lena looked down the hallway toward the elevator bank. The credenza was still there at the far end of the room with the carafe on it. Someone else's job now. "Most people," she said, "see what they expect to see." She hit the button for 44. The doors opened. She stepped in. She had always known what she was worth. It had just taken the rest of the room a little while to catch up.